It's Omicron. It's in Africa mostly, and it's not super widespread yet, but it's this newest COVID variant that has the White House and the markets making moves tonight. With President Biden, just a few hours before we came on the air, talking about his decision to cut off air travel from 8 countries in southern Africa. A bunch of other nations are doing the same thing. We're live with that and the reality check on this latest variant, along with why it all triggered the Dow's worst day of the year today. That's in just a little bit. Plus, something rare from a House Republican caught up in controversy, an apology. What we're hearing from Lauren Boebert after her Islamophobic comment about a colleague, but whether saying sorry is going to be enough to avoid a punishment from House leaders. And the head of Ukraine says there's a potential coup in the works against him, and he's pointing the finger at Russia. How the Kremlin and President Biden are responding tonight. And the magic may not be coming back to the movies. Hate to say it, with some folks still a little sketched out about going to the theater. Why that has some studios rethinking how to roll out their premieres. We'll talk about that later in the show. Hey, I'm Hallie, and we're starting tonight with that warning about Omicron. And let me just say what you're probably all thinking, that it sounds like something out of a Transformers movie. It is not. It is the newest COVID variant of concern, named after a letter in the Greek alphabet. And so far, there's only been a few dozen reported cases, mostly in southern Africa. But here's the thing. Experts think it may be super transmissible, which is why you're seeing dozens of countries, including the U.S., announcing this just today, move really fast to block travel from places where this variant's been found. You're seeing the map on your screen. South Africa, 7 other nearby African countries, too. President Biden put those new travel restrictions, which start Monday, in place after meeting with his team on this, including Dr. Anthony Fauci. And Dr. Fauci explains to our Lester Holt why Omicron is such a concern right now. Watch.
Since the steepness of the curve in which it is broken out in South Africa is really of concern, because it's a rather steep curve going up, which means that it's spreading really quite rapidly in South Africa. And then we're seeing cases popping up in countries around, particularly when there's been travel from South Africa or southern African countries to other places like Israel and places like that.
You're going to see more of that interview with Dr. Fauci tonight on NBC Nightly News with Lester Holt. What's interesting here, the World Health Organization, in an emergency meeting this morning, named this a variant concern with a lot of different mutations and a higher rate of people getting reinfected. But they're opposing travel restrictions right now. A WHO spokesperson told UN officials today, quote, at this point, implementing travel measures is being cautioned against, and they recommend a, quote, risk-based and scientific approach for travel bans. Josh Letterman is traveling with the president in Nantucket for this holiday weekend. And Josh, we saw the president out in Nantucket walking around after lunch when he stopped to take some Q&A from the reporters traveling with him. I want to play a little bit of that, as it's really the first we've heard directly from the president on this big news. Watch.
We don't know a lot about the variant, except that it is a great concern. It seems to spread rapidly, and I spent about a half hour this morning with my COVID team led by Dr. Fauci, and so that was the decision we made.
So, Josh, explain the thinking behind the White House and this move on travel restrictions here.
Better safe than sorry, Hallie. That's the approach that President Biden finally reached after having that half-an-hour virtual meeting with Dr. Fauci, other advisors from the CDC. They've been trying to walk a fine line here, Hallie, because they don't want to have a knee-jerk reaction every time there's some report about a new variant, or to respond emotionally to the very real concerns people have. They want to base this on science and the data. On the other hand, they don't want to wait too long and then find themselves in a situation where they're trying to play catch-up. And so President Biden, as of that meeting this morning, felt comfortable putting these restrictions into place. They'll take effect on Monday, affecting not only South Africa, but 7 other countries, less populous countries in the southern region of Africa. But we should point out, American citizens who are abroad in one of those countries, they don't need to worry at this point in time that they're going to get stranded, unable to get back home. Exactly. You can come home if you're a citizen, if you're a permanent resident, but you are going to have to get a negative COVID test, which, of course, is something that applies to everyone now who's trying to get back into the United States.
And, Josh, we saw the markets move big time today. We're going to talk about that later in the show. But President Biden really seemed to downplay that. He basically said, hey, this is expected. We sort of, in so many words, this is sort of priced into things here.
That's exactly right. President Biden trying to downplay the fact that the markets tanked so significantly. He knows it's going to go up and down whenever there are these types of new events that come out on COVID, and he doesn't want people to get too concerned, given that there are already such profound economic concerns around inflation, around rising gas prices and everything else. The flip side of this is we obviously know the White House is watching very closely. They don't want to see negative stock market effects, and they already are aware of just how concerned people are from the polling about the economy and just how much they're actually blaming the Biden administration for that. So if this goes on much longer, I think you'll continue to see the White House trying to show that they are not taking that for granted.
There's also this piece of things where the president wants the World Trade Organization to basically waive these intellectual property protections for vaccines so that more of it can be made around the world. Do you see the attention on Omicron moving the needle on that front to try to get more vaccine made and distributed to the countries that need it?
Well, that's President Biden's argument, right? I mean, he made this argument all the way back in April that there needed to be a waiver. He wanted the WHO to act on that for intellectual property, not for all drugs and vaccines, specifically for COVID-19 vaccines. But since then, I got to say, he's been getting a lot of pressure from groups who have said he has not done nearly enough to lean on these drug manufacturers, to lean on these other countries to actually go ahead with that waiver. And so now President Biden today in that statement saying this new variant, these new concerns should be just the latest argument for why, when the WHO has that ministerial next week, they should go ahead with that waiver, allow this drug to be, this vaccine to be manufactured in all over the world, including in places like South Africa, where they really have alarmingly low vaccination rates.
Josh Letterman traveling with President Biden in Nantucket for us on this holiday weekend. Josh, thank you for being with us. Appreciate it. Remember, folks, no sign that Omicron is in the U.S. just yet. That's what experts are saying. But overall, COVID cases in this country are going up just in the past couple weeks. 31 states and D.C. saw higher COVID numbers. The numbers are going down in only 9 states. You see that on the map you're looking at. Erica Edwards, who reports for our medical unit, is here with some context. Erica, I'm so glad to have you on. And let's start with this new variant, right? All of these vaccine manufacturers say, OK, we're trying to look into how effective our vaccine is against Omicron. Do we know anything yet about whether people who are vaccinated are protected from it?
We don't. And that's one of the key questions that Dr. Fauci and other scientists are really looking into. Dr. Fauci, earlier in that interview today with Lester, said that he has been on the phone and Zooming all day today with his colleagues in South Africa to sort of try to figure out that question. That's one of the three key questions that we have here.
What are the other two?
Do our vaccines, in fact, work well against this variant? Number 2, does this variant spread easier than the Delta variant? And number 3, Hallie, is it more dangerous? That is, does it make people sicker? That's really what they're trying to figure out.
And we don't know the answers to any of those 3 questions right now, right?
I wish we did. I wish we did. And that's exactly what the World Health Organization, infectious diseases around the world are really trying. They're trying to focus on that. It might be a few weeks until we really know those questions.
So that was my question, right? The timeline of this, because you heard Dr. Fauci say today we need more information. That data is not going to come instantly. You think like by the time we get to Christmas that maybe we will have some of these answers?
So that's what the experts are saying. You know, I think that one thing we've learned in this pandemic is to never really be surprised about anything that happens. Yeah. But they are very focused on this. They say, this particular variant has a large number of mutations. Now, in general, scientists find mutations all the time, and most of them are completely meaningless. This one, however, it has a large number, dozens of mutations. They're homing in on about 1/3 of those that they think make this more transmissible than perhaps the Delta variant. One other thing I wanted to point out today that I thought was really interesting from the World Health Organization, they also said that there's early evidence that this particular variant, Omicron, could increase the risk for reinfection of COVID-19.
Explain why that matters.
Well, if you, when you have a natural infection, you develop antibodies to this virus. If, in fact, and this is, again, we don't know this, but if, in fact, those early antibodies don't protect you from becoming reinfected, that's a real problem. And it definitely does not bode well for vaccines in general.
Erica Edwards, and so important, I think, to remind folks, listen, only a couple dozen confirmed cases right now. This isn't all over the place. This isn't Delta, but someone to watch. Erica Edwards, it's so great to have you break that down for us. I appreciate it. Later in the show, we're going to have more on the market piece of this, but we're also talking money in a different way because, as you know, it's Black Friday. Here we are, and it is on track to be breaking records. The National Retail Federation says we could spend $80+ billion more on gifts this year than last year, which works out to about $762 per shopper, according to NerdWallet. Is that how much you're spending this holiday season? What's also changing is how people are shopping for those gifts. Nearly 7 out of 10 people say they plan to go online and not just through store websites. NBC's Joe Linkamp posted up at a Best Buy with more on what is trending online and in stores. So, Joe, what's interesting is the sort of confluence of things here. There's, more people wanting to shop. There's this huge supply chain issue that brick and mortar stores are having to face, and some companies are trying to tackle that in creative ways.
That's right. So right now we do know that 32% of shoppers say that they would venture into a store like this Best Buy to make a purchase. Now that's double compared to last year. Of course, that was very much the height of the pandemic, pre-vaccine. So the picture is completely different. So there's a lot of demand on the system right now, but stores like Best Buy, Target, Gap, Nordstrom are all trying to figure out a way to meet demand as they face these huge supply chain issues, especially when it comes to getting things through the ports, off the boats, and onto railways and into stores and warehouses to meet that need. And what we're seeing is that $5.1 billion has already been spent online, according to Adobe, and that was Thanksgiving Day alone. Now, that sounds like a big number, but it was actually on the lower end of the range. So that starts to make me think, okay, with retail sales so strong earlier, people were purchasing earlier, and then you have the high cost of inflation and prices going up on gas and food, cutting into that ability to spend online. So it'll be really interesting to see what the numbers come out to be on this Black Friday, but we are expecting very strong online numbers in particular, as people are just accustomed to just doing it online like you and me.
Hello, that's what I do, and it's not even just online, right? It's like the social media piece of this, which is getting bigger and bigger, it seems, every year. People getting influenced on Instagram. Guilty as charged on that front. Have you seen those numbers? Is there more of an uptick in like the Instagram, TikTok, Twitter shoppers?
Yes, guilty is charged over here too, and I would say that if you look at the data, that's what's bearing out. I just got some new stats here saying that Salesforce predicts that online traffic to e-commerce sites from social referrals is actually going to grow by 30% this holiday season. That's huge. And then how will you shop? You're going to be influenced 47% on Instagram.
Wait, but go back to that.
Yeah, 40% on Facebook.
35% on Amazon, right? I think people think of online shopping. I think a lot of folks go, go down on Amazon. But Instagram is huge in this area.
It is huge in this area, and it's because of the targeted advertising and how successful Facebook, or Meta now, has been at targeting you and figuring out exactly what you want when you want it. And so this type of advertising is proven to be more effective than anything else. And if your friends are clicking and liking on it, then you can see why you would make that purchase, especially if it appears to be, a huge discount. So as you look at online shopping, we're going to be tracking and seeing how all of that plays out, because it's your community, so to speak, even though you're being advertised to. You are the product.
That's such a good point. Joe Linkamp posted up at my local Best Buy. So, Joe, it's great to see you there. I'm glad you're in town. I hope you have a great holiday Friday.
Thanks, Hallie.
Listen, it's not just supply chain issues, right? Stores have to worry about other things this holiday season, like security becoming more and more of a concern in some spots after a whole bunch of those so-called smash and grab robberies at stores across the country. If you've been watching this show, you've seen them. A lot of them have happened in California, and that included 2 that have just happened. Right before Thanksgiving, an Apple store in L.A. was robbed of $20,000 worth of merchandise in broad daylight. That's definitely an escalation. Most of these things happen at night. That's what we saw in Santa Rosa Wednesday night, when 5 people there reportedly attacked a security guard with some kind of chemical and then ran off with $25,000 worth of purses from a Nordstrom's. Police have made some arrests, and they're stepping up patrols in places that have been particularly hard hit, like L.A., San Francisco, and Chicago. Now that we are all hopefully you are enjoying your holiday break, you might be thinking about getting ready to head back home. But there's a reality to that as well. TSA says Sunday is expected to be the busiest travel day of the week, even after record travel at airports the day before Thanksgiving. That's when 2.3 million people went through checkpoints Wednesday. That's the most since the early days of the pandemic and more than double what we saw this time last year when, again, context, it was the middle of the pandemic. No surprise, it's more. Kristen Dahlgren is at LaGuardia Airport in New York City. Kristen, it's great to see you. Look ahead to Sunday here, right? What's expected to be the busiest of all these recent travel days. I have to think, given the numbers that we've already seen, all these people leaving Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, they're all coming back Sunday, right? We got to be hitting records Sunday.
Yeah, we may, and it's still up in the air. But as you can see, look, today it's really quiet here at LaGuardia.
Sure.
Think about it. All those people that came earlier in the week, they want to spend as much time as they can. They probably haven't traveled in a long time. They maybe haven't seen their relatives, at least for a holiday in the past 2 years. And so this is a big deal. So we are seeing a lot of people coming through the airports. We saw those record numbers, 2.3 million screened by the TSA on Wednesday. I don't know if we'll quite get to the record of all time, and that was, take a look, in 2019, the Sunday after Thanksgiving, so pre-pandemic, 2.9 million people screened by the TSA. So we'll be watching that number, but I think it's safe to say that Sunday is going to be very busy both at the airports and on the roads, Hal.
But then you have this whole weather thing, right? Rain and snow over the weekend, especially in the Northeast. Listen, I know you're not Al Roker, my sweet friend, and I want you to channel your inner Al here, but how do you think that might play into things? How bad could that get?
Right, and there's the thing. I think there's a lot of people probably trying to play Al Roker right now, trying to figure out the best time to leave. We want to leave it to the last minute, but we don't want to get stuck in a storm. There are a few storms that we're watching crisscrossing the country. We could see the first measurable snow of the year in places in the Northeast, so watching those very carefully. You know, I think a lot of people are still going to try and push it and wait until the last minute, squeeze as much out of this really special Thanksgiving as they can, Hallie.
I hope it's been a special one for you, Kristen Dahlgren. You and your friends at LaGuardia Airport, thank you very much for being with us on this Friday night. I appreciate you.
You bet.
Coming up here on the show, something we don't always see in Congress. An apology from a Republican for what she said about a Democrat. You're going to hear what Lauren Boebert said about Ilhan Omar and why she says she's sorry next. So something happened today that you don't always see over on Capitol Hill. An apology. This one, a House Republican saying sorry to a Democratic colleague. Why? Because Congresswoman Lauren Boebert made Islamophobic remarks about Congresswoman Ilhan Omar, who is Muslim. You're looking at Boebert on your screen right now, what appears to be a campaign event over the weekend. On this video, which, by the way, we're not going to play because the comment is offensive, she suggests that Omar, who wears a hijab, was mistaken for a terrorist in a Capitol elevator. We should note NBC News has not independently verified this video. Congresswoman Omar was very upset about this, called this an example of anti-Muslim bigotry. Well, now Boebert's coming out saying she's sorry if she offended anyone in the Muslim community. She says she's reaching out to Omar's office to speak with her directly and says there are plenty of policy differences to focus on without what she describes as an unnecessary distraction. Garrett Hake, our Capitol Hill correspondent, is here with us on set today. Wait, Garrett, so she says she's sorry for an unnecessary distraction. I think it is factually fair to point out Congresswoman Boebert is the one who made the remarks in the first place. Any response from Ilhan Omar or her office yet?
No, not that we've seen. I mean, this whole thing has played out on Twitter, and so we're kind of reading the Twitter tea leaves here. Omar, after the apology, although not in direct response to it, said that she wants this to be the kind of thing that Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy looks at, that Speaker Pelosi potentially looks at for potential disciplinary action. But there's no also indication that the call between Omar and Boebert referenced in the Boebert apology tweet has taken place.
Talk about this thing from Speaker Pelosi, right? We have seen her make moves to take action to punish Republicans in Congress before for things that have hit a certain bar, like things that are threats, for example. What is your sense, based on your reporting, based on your years covering Capitol Hill, of whether or not Congresswoman Boebert might actually get reprimanded in some way?
I think that's unlikely at this point. First of all, I don't think this rises to the level of a threat directly. I mean, as reprehensible as the comments were, Speaker Pelosi's bar up till now has been threatening comments. I don't think this is it. The apology, whatever you make of the structure of it and the, the sort of if you're offended part of it, and the idea that the moving on from a thing that you caused, it's a low bar, but it clears a bar of kind of recognition of wrongdoing here that has come about without a lot of outside pressure from other House members, given that the House has been out. All of that is to say, I would be surprised if Kevin McCarthy takes any action against her. He's not done so against any of his members so far.
Right.
And I don't think this rises to Speaker Pelosi's bar, although I could be wrong.
It's also not the first time that Congresswoman Omar has called out some of her colleagues for making what she sees as very anti-Muslim remarks.
Yeah, and this has become a recurring trend here. And, frankly, this is... For a very long time, we didn't have any Muslims in Congress, and now you do. And they're saying, look, the way that this business has been done is wrong. These kinds of remarks are wrong. And it's frankly, I think, a change that was perhaps a long time coming to have a more diverse Congress sort of calling out the way that Congress does its business. Congresswoman Omar has also become something of a target on the right because she has been willing to criticize Israel and Israeli policies. That has made her unpopular on the right, and it has created some back and forth commentary about what's appropriate and what's not, what's anti-Semitic, what's anti-Islamic, what's Islamophobic. It has really raised the temperature in some ways around the issue, the debate that she has created. And I don't say that in a negative way at all. It has created a spotlight on some of these issues that hasn't existed in Congress until recently.
It's a good point. On the other side of things, you have Congresswoman Boebert, who is making these comments, it seemed like in front of a group of supporters, right? And there's been a lot of discussion, I think, especially in the last couple of years, about the way that some Republicans, specifically House Republicans, are looking to play to a base that is open to hearing offensive comments like that.
Absolutely. I mean, look, Donald Trump started his campaign this way. House Republicans in particular have looked at it as a model. Owning the libs is a policy position.
Yeah. Trying
to be offensive, trying to draw attention in this way. It's like if you have the right enemies, that's a effective, some of these House Republicans believe, policy position for them. It has worked for some of these far-right Republicans to model themselves in this way on Donald Trump as a way to raise fundraising numbers, as a way to raise their profile. For good or ill. I don't think we're seeing the last of this trend.
Garrett Hake, our Capitol Hill correspondent, who is here with us live and in the flesh.
Not on Capitol Hill, but close enough.
Close enough. Garrett, thank you very much. Happy Friday.
You bet.
Appreciate you being with us. Coming up here on the show, Ukraine says it stopped this attempted coup and that the Russians were involved. But surprise, surprise, the Kremlin says wasn't us. Plus, Merck's COVID pill that's supposed to cut back on the number of people in the hospital, the number of people killed, might be a little less effective than people first thought. But U.S. regulators may still give it the green light. We'll explain. Have you heard about U.S. lawmakers traveling to Taiwan, even though China warned them to call off the trip? We're going to talk about why they're not staying away coming up in the show. But first, let's get you over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, a bit of a mixed review out today on Merck's experimental COVID pill. FDA scientists say it's effective fighting the virus, but it's not quite as effective as first thought. They say the numbers show it reduces the risk of being in the hospital or of dying by 30%. But those initial reports, based on results that were not totally complete, had it as high as 50%. Number 2, more than 20,000 people still do not have power in Southern California after more than 60,000 of them lost electricity on Thanksgiving Day. Not great timing. Why? Really bad winds. The utility there cut power as a precaution to try to cut back on the risk of fires. Number 3, the White House wants oil and gas companies to pay more to drill on public lands. The administration now says taxpayers are getting a raw deal by rates that haven't been raised for more than 100 years. Number 4, the girl with the green eyes seen by millions. Her, you're looking at her. She is leaving her home country of Afghanistan to escape Taliban rule. Sharbat Gula, who became known as the Afghan girl after the magazine cover you just saw, here she is more recently. She's been granted refugee status in Italy. Number 5, Egypt is celebrating the reopening of a 3,400-year-old road connecting 2 ancient temples. This was the ceremony. It looked gangbusters. Hundreds of people dressed in costumes paraded along the route. It's a huge festival. They're hoping to attract people to one of Egypt's top tourist spots. 5 U.S. lawmakers are in Taiwan to meet with government officials even after China told them call off the trip. NBC News obtained excerpts of a letter sent to Congresswoman Alyssa Slotkin. The Chinese embassy asked the U.S. to, quote, immediately cancel the visit to Taiwan to not cause huge damage to the China-U.S. relationship. But has that damage already been done? China's made governments decide between recognizing it or Taiwan, and seeing as this is the second trip U.S. lawmakers are making over there this month, the U.S. may be pushing some limits on that front. John Allen scooped this story. He's with us now live. John, it's great to see you. Listen, You obtained excerpts of this letter shared with NBC News. China's been very clear about what this trip might do to their relationship between the U.S. and China. But is it posturing from China, or how much teeth do you really think it has?
Well, first of all, Hallie, congratulations on the new show. I'm excited to join you.
Thrilled to have you.
You're doing fantastic with it. As far as what we're seeing here in the U.S.-China relations, this is not going to be the biggest problem in U.S.-China relations. Right. Look, we're going to see some sort of retaliation from China, whether it's military exercises or something along those lines. But, they're angry that we're playing in their backyard. Of course, we are trying to rip countries away from China's influence. So I think this will continue to go on. Explain
the meeting, or I should say the reason that these lawmakers wanted to visit Taiwan. Why now?
Sure. I mean, the big thing is that there are members of Congress who want to show support for Taiwan, who want to show support for that independent island nation. The United States doesn't recognize it, as you pointed out before, because China won't have diplomatic relations with the U.S. if the U.S. has formal diplomatic relations with Taiwan. And so this is a way of having informal talks and showing that the Congress of the United States is not necessarily in the same place that China is, or even the Biden administration.
And this isn't the first time that we, in the time of the Biden administration, John, as you know well, have talked about the U.S.-China relationship vis-a-vis Taiwan, right, as it relates to Taiwan.
Absolutely. Just recently, President Biden said that the United States would protect Taiwan against China. And of course, the big fear in Taiwan is that China would either attack the country or lay siege to it, essentially blockade it, choke off the country from the rest of the world. And so, President Biden said that the United States would protect Taiwan from China. And then the White House walked it back quickly, not a reversal, but said the policy hadn't changed. Our policy is called strategic ambiguity. That's right. Which is one of the funniest things I've ever heard. But what it basically means is that the U.S. doesn't want China to know exactly how far the U.S. will or won't go in protecting Taiwan.
So strategic ambiguity does sound like a particularly, semantics-related tongue twister there. But it has real meaning because this is so sensitive diplomatically. I think that some of that sometimes, John, gets lost, like where we live inside the Beltway in Washington. But there are, years and years and decades of precedent about the relationship that the U.S. has with Taiwan and the way that strategic ambiguity keeps China, if not on great terms with the U.S., at least not in, outright conflict. Fair?
Absolutely. And Taiwan is hugely important to China for a variety of reasons. I mean, there's sort of the historical, the cultural, and economic. And, if you think about it in sort of terms of the United States, if, for instance, Puerto Rico was to vote for independence from the United States and then suddenly, China had a relationship with Puerto Rico and was engaged in that way, the United States would look at it and say, hey, this is our backyard, this is our historical partner, this is somebody that was part of our country, and we would be upset by that. And so it's really about spheres of influence, and the United States is delicately trying to maintain its relationship with China so that the positive benefits of that can come out of it without the two countries, really the two world superpowers at this point, being in direct conflict or even indirect conflict.
John Allen, great reporting. Thank you very much for being with us. Next time we'll get you here on set, friend. We'll have you swing by. Thanks, John. Ukraine and Russia's relationship. New questions now about whether that is hitting yet another low. And that's because the Ukrainian President Zelensky, said his next-door neighbor, Russia, is plotting a coup against him, set for next week. It's like this preemptive warning of a takedown of his government, right? The State Department is responding to this here in the U.S., saying that all options are on the table against Russia. And President Biden said just late today that he's probably going to speak with both President Zelensky and the Russian President Vladimir Putin. It will probably come as zero surprise to you that the Kremlin is denying claims that they're trying for a coup. But Ukraine's fears may not be totally unwarranted, right? You've seen Russian troops boosting their presence on the Ukrainian border for months now. Keir Simmons knows this region probably better than most any of us here at NBC News. Keir, I'm so glad to have you here. And it's interesting that we heard from President Biden today say that he will, in all probability, talk with both presidents. What message does the U.S. need to deliver here to both of these governments?
Well, it's a very difficult question, that, Hallie. It's difficult to get the message right. As you know, Russian-Ukrainian relations are intertwined. They are clouded by intrigue and espionage. You could even say that they are clouded by the fog of war. Of course, it's not a war yet. And that is the real concern, that those troops on the border, that increases the tension. Allegations like this by the Ukrainian president that there is a plan to hold a coup against him in just a week's time, that ratchets up the tension. Do the two sides stumble into a conflict? And increasingly, NATO has been supportive of Ukraine. Do other countries get pulled into that? Now, Russia doesn't want a conflict, but that's not necessarily a reason that you don't have an escalating issue and it leads to some kind of problem on the border. So the president needs to send a message to Russia to not take any action, like sending troops across the border.
Right.
He also, the Russians say, needs to send a message to Kiev that they do need to negotiate in some way with the Russians.
This issue of this, as you talked about, Keir, what's rather extraordinary about this, among the many things, is President Zelensky talking about this potential for a coup next week. Like, it might be, if the first rule of coups is not to talk about the coup, right? Do you think that by the president of Ukraine sounding the alarm about this, that it effectively removes any possibility of a coup at all, if in fact it were to happen? You see what I mean? Like, by him bringing it up, does that eliminate the possibility?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, well, it could have been an attempt to do that. He might he also, though, have said it kind of accidentally, in a sense, not saying that it doesn't have some credibility. We don't know. NBC News certainly has no evidence over whether this is true or not. I mean, that could have been what he was aiming to do. It was a long news conference and quite confrontational, so it's really difficult to tell what his aim was, because we don't know the details. Now, he has said that there's intelligence and that there are recordings. We wait to see that intelligence, if we ever do, or hear those recordings. But keep in mind, too, that one man's coup is another man's support for the opposition. Just to give you an example, President Putin is absolutely convinced that the U.S. wants to overthrow him, that the CIA is working with the opposition in Russia. Of course, America completely denies that. So, again, there is confusion. There can be confusion in the understanding between these two capitals, these two sides. But, of course, that doesn't help us if what we're trying to do is avoid conflict.
Our viewers will know, Keir, that you have done some incredible reporting from Moscow. You've interviewed President Putin multiple times. We talked about how the Kremlin, of course, is denying this, unsurprisingly here. How do you think Putin and his government are watching what's unfolding right now?
Well, I mean, look, I think that the Kremlin's playbook fits fairly well with the idea of at least supporting the Ukrainian opposition, if not supporting some kind of a coup attempt like this, despite the denials. What we know, of course, about Russia, and by the way, it's been the same true too about China, that the China story that you were talking about just a moment ago. What we know is that what they try and do is push the needle as far as they can without an out-and-out conflict, because, of course, in the end, Russia would very likely lose a confrontation with America. So they try and have the fight in the margins, if you like. You could call it a shadow war. And that suggests to me that this kind of political intrigue is just the kind of thing that President Putin would be in favor of. Keep in mind that in the end, the Ukraine situation, I mean, Putin was the one who sent troops into Crimea. But in the end, the Ukraine situation is a problem for Russia. They need to try to resolve it. It's a stalemate. I think there could be something to what the president of Ukraine has said. Again, though, we don't have any evidence beyond his words at this news conference today.
Keir Simmons, thank you so much for staying up late for us. I know, overseas in London on a holiday weekend for you. Appreciate you being here. Thanks, pal. Now to what's being called a miracle after a mine disaster in Siberia. 51 people have been killed after that coal mine fire that started from an underground gas leak. But today, rescue teams found somebody. They found somebody who survived this. Here's the deal. The fire started after a methane explosion that happened right after 8 a.m. Thursday, as the night shift was ending and the morning shift was about to start. And this mine had a lot of problems. A Russian watchdog agency said it had hundreds of violations this year alone. Matt Bodner is in Moscow.
Well, there's still a lot of questions about what caused this, how this happened, but there's actually been some interesting reporting today in the Russian state media, of all places, just talking to relatives of the 46 missing miners. And it seems, at least just from some of those accounts, that everyone at this mine knew that there were issues with safety, particularly with gas leaks, possibly even just a few weeks ago. One of the wives actually said that there may have been an incident, a fire that broke out that the miners themselves extinguished not too long ago. So there's this kind of sense of dismay about what seems, at least at the moment, to have been a preventable accident, or at least something that shouldn't have been allowed to happen the way it did. The Russian Investigative Committee, kind of a federal law enforcement body here, has opened its investigation looking at negligence. This is a criminal case, by the way, so I think that they will probably home on those kinds of statements. But basically at this point, there are still 46 missing miners. There were, for a time, 6 missing rescue personnel. All of them were presumed to be dead, but in what's being described as a miracle here in Russia, just a few hours ago, they found one of those missing emergency services personnel, still conscious even, pulled him out of the rubble. He is now recovering in a hospital, being treated for what they describe as minor carbon monoxide poisoning. But the head of the region, the governor of the region, Kemerova, this morning said that at this point, there's not a lot of hope for the 46 missing miners. Hallie?
No, but our thanks to Matt Bodner for that story. Still an incredible story of survivor for at least that person. Coming up here on the show, a couple trials involving names I know you know set to get started next week. This is big stuff. What to expect when Ghislaine Maxwell and Jussie Smollett head into their courtrooms. And a reunion video that's everything about the joy families feel when they finally get to be together for Thanksgiving. It's coming up. Two people who've been making headlines for years are about to step into courtrooms for their trials, and we've got your preview in just a second. But first, NBC News covers hundreds of stories each day, and because you couldn't possibly read or watch or listen to them all, our bureau teams have done it for you. This is what they tell us is going down in their regions in a segment we call The Local. From our Northeast Bureau, Philadelphia looks like it's headed for the deadliest year in its history. The city now has more than 500 homicides this year alone. That ties a record set in 1990. Activists are pointing the finger at city leaders, and some people who live in Philly tell our station there they're getting kind of worried about going outside. From our Midwest Bureau, 2 people in Chicago had a lot to give thanks for yesterday. That's because the University of Chicago Medical Center performed 2 heart transplants on Thanksgiving. The hospital says that brings them to a record 55 heart transplants this year alone. Also out of the Midwest, this video from a Chicago family that really says it all for families that got to finally share a holiday again in person. Look at that. That's 11-year-old Piper and 8-year-old Alexa, who could not contain themselves when their grandparents walked through the door. And then wait, the excitement gets even bigger. New puppy, grandpa and a puppy. Could you be more psyched? I mean, that is Thanksgiving right there. We've been talking tonight here on the show about the big news of the day, right? That's this new coronavirus variant called Omicron. You know who's really worried about it? Wall Street. There was a huge drop today in the markets not too long after we learned that this variant even exists. Check it out. Big board for the Dow, dropping more than 900 points on a trading day that was even shorter because of the holiday weekend. And this is the worst single-day drop of the whole year. The S&P 500, the NASDAQ are also going into the weekend down more than 2%. So let me bring in Kelly Evans from CNBC. Kelly, it is so great to have you on the show. Thank you for being with us tonight. Can you talk a little bit? This seemed to happen really fast. It feels like before Thanksgiving, we hardly knew this variant existed. Here we are the Friday after, and Wall Street reacted like this.
No, you're exactly right. It's great to be with you, Hallie. Just yesterday, the biggest news, people aren't supposed to be covering the markets on Thanksgiving, but there was this big call from Goldman about how the Fed was going to have to taper more quickly and inflation's getting out of control. Interest rates are rising. Boom. The first session, a shortened session today, saw totally the opposite playing out in markets. This is how markets work. They always do what you least expect. Dow dropped 905, worst day, like you said, of the entire year, worst day since last October. There was selling pressure everywhere. The concern is that the WHO has already called Omicron a variant of concern. They never did. Do you remember Mu? That was a variant that came around about several months ago. Nothing really happened with it, but it never went as far as to get labeled a variant of concern like Omicron already has, even based on the very small number of cases that we know about. So you see the market concern. I will say vaccine makers, Moderna up 20% today, Pfizer up 6%.
Man.
What are they telling you? They think they can come to the rescue here.
So listen, Kelly, I know you don't have a crystal ball. I totally get that. If you did, you'd be a Powerball winner. But like, as you look ahead to where the futures are and you look ahead to Monday, we've seen this, right? We've seen this a fair amount over the last year or so, like bad news for Wall Street, major drops, then big rebounds, maybe the next trading day. Investors have the weekend to like sleep this off. What is your sense based on your many years, I know, covering this?
Yeah, totally fair. I mean, the joke today is, it's just the machines trading. There's no one actually on the desk. It's algorithms, and they're pushing things around, and common sense will come to bear on Monday. Frankly, it's true, thin trading volumes. Look at the move in oil, down 13%. That's what they were trying to get with the SPR release. Couldn't get it. Got it today because of this bad economic news. All that matters from here on out is what happens with the variant. If we have really bad news over the weekend and on Monday, it's not going to make a difference who's in charge. The other thing I'll mention, usually when markets have been selling off on these, the policymakers come to the rescue. May not do that this time around. They're concerned about inflation already.
Right.
The Fed's trying to go the other way. So, again, they're really relying on the vaccine makers. They think America has lockdown fatigue. Maybe it won't hurt the economy so much. We'll see if that's how things are shaping up into next week.
Kelly Evans over at CNBC. Kelly, it's so great to talk to you. Thank you for being with us.
Great to be with you. Thank you.
Monday promises to be a pretty big day in court with a couple familiar names facing charges. First, Ghislaine Maxwell. She's going on trial in a federal court in New York on charges she helped her friend, Jeffrey Epstein, recruit and abuse underage girls in the 1990s. Epstein died in jail in 2019. Second, you've got Jussie Smollett. Remember him? He was a former Empire star. He will go on trial for allegedly lying to police about being the victim of a racist and homophobic hate crime in Chicago. Smollett said attackers put a noose around his neck and poured bleach on him. Prosecutors say he planned the whole thing to help his career. Our legal analyst, Danny Savalos, is going to be closely watching all of this. So, Danny, let's look ahead to Monday, and let me start with Ghislaine Maxwell, right? The judge has made this case pretty narrow about these sort of 4 specific incidents in the 90s. The other names we've seen linked to Epstein may not come up at all. How do you see this trial playing out? Does it stay kind of in that narrowly focused lens?
Yeah, I've handled cases where the allegations date back decades. And the challenge is there's just a dearth of evidence on both sides, for both the government and the defense, to be able to drum up evidence about who was where, when, and how back in the early 90s. In fact, most of the evidence will come from the mouths of the witnesses and specifically the alleged victims in this case. They will get up on the stand and they will point to Maxwell, and the defense will cross-examine them vigorously about what they remember and test them with the crucible of cross-examination.
So is that how you see sort of the biggest piece of the strategy from the defense attorneys here for Maxwell to go after, in this instance, the victims? Or how do you see them framing her involvement?
Number one, challenge their memories. And number two, challenge what the government says Maxwell actually did as not grooming at all. After all, if you look at the indictment, and I'm making the defense's argument for them, if you look at the indictment, it alleges that Maxwell befriended these victims, took them shopping. That's not the kind of thing that is contributing to a crime. That is separate. And if the defense, don't expect the defense to point to the empty chair that is where the deceased Epstein should be sitting and say, that's the real bad guy, not Maxwell. That's what I expect the defense as a preview of what they're going to argue.
Okay, so now flip the switch and talk to me about Jussie Smollett, another big trial, high-profile trial starting on Monday. Charges against him were dropped. He got to this deal with prosecutors, but then a special prosecutor picked this whole thing back up. Now his lawyers are trying to say, hey, this is double jeopardy. You can't do this, not allowed. Do they have a point?
Yes and no. I mean, there are very specific rules about when jeopardy attaches. And typically in a criminal case, it's not really until the jury is sworn. So prosecutors can charge someone, uncharge them, recharge them. So there are very technical rules about double jeopardy. But the other challenge again here is this is a case where the allegations, I know this is hard to believe, date back several years. COVID has created a logjam in the courts, and cases like this that we have to scratch our head to remember, oh yeah,
right.
When did that happen, are now only finally coming to trial. And in that time, memories fade, witnesses disappear, cases get it just a little bit harder for the prosecution, but they also get a little harder for the defense to find evidence in their favor.
What is the penalty potentially for Smollett if he is convicted? I believe he faces disorderly conduct here.
Disorderly conduct is not a major felony.
Right.
It's the kind of case that somebody with no criminal record might even argue for a probation-only sentence. But here, this is one of those prosecutions that's more about the point than the penalty, because Jussie Smollett was perceived by many as having abused the system, the criminal system, drawn away resources from fighting crime so that Jussie Smollett allegedly could boost his profile.
Danny Savalos, I imagine that you and I will be talking again on Monday. I can predict it. Have a great weekend. Thank you for that preview. Appreciate it.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.